The first deep gouge appeared overnight. A ragged scar, tearing through the velvety emerald perfection of Margot Barclay's front lawn like a drunken insult. It wasn't just dirt. It was violation. Margot stood frozen on her porch, ceramic coffee mug warming her suddenly cold hands, staring at the wound. 47 years old, a widow for 3. Her meticulously maintained quarter-acre in the heart of Maple Creek Estates wasn't just grass. It was sanctuary, therapy, the one thing she felt she could absolutely control. And now, this. Her gaze, sharp as the shears she used on her prize-winning rose bushes, slid inevitably next door. The Henderson house pulsed with the chaotic energy of 2 unsupervised preteens. Bikes lay abandoned on their patchy, neglected lawn. A soccer ball rested against the sagging porch steps. And there, frozen mid-gallop like startled deer, were the perpetrators, Biff and Brittany Henderson. No, not Biff and Brittany. Braden and Haley, 11 and 9, respectively. Human tornadoes disguised in neon athletic wear. Braden clutched a bright orange plastic shovel, guilt plastered across his freckled face. Haley just looked defiant, hands on hips, grass stains already blooming on her knees. "Morning, Mrs. Barclay," Haley chirped, a practiced innocence in her voice that didn't reach her eyes. Margot didn't trust herself to speak. She simply pointed, her finger trembling slightly, not with age, but with suppressed fury, at the fresh wound in her lawn. Braden shuffled his feet. Haley shrugged, a masterpiece of nonchalance. "We were just digging for treasure?" Braden offered weakly. "On my property." Margot's voice was low, icy. The morning air felt suddenly charged. "It was an accident," Haley declared. "Braden tripped with the shovel." Margot knew a rehearsed lie when she heard one. This wasn't an accident. This was the latest skirmish in a Cold War that had simmered since the Hendersons moved in 2 years ago. Frisbees landing in her peonies, basketballs bouncing off her living room window. Twice. The constant high-decibel shrieking that shattered her peaceful evenings. Polite requests to Susan Henderson had been met with distracted smiles and vague promises of talking to the kids. Ted Henderson, perpetually glued to his phone or tinkering loudly with his overly large pickup truck, was simply absent. Margot felt invisible, her sanctuary under siege. She took a long, slow sip of coffee, the bitterness mirroring her mood. "Get off my lawn," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Now, and take your treasure hunt with you." They scrambled, Braden dragging the offending shovel, Haley casting one last challenging glance over her shoulder. Margot watched them disappear into their chaotic house, the slam of the screen door echoing the slam of her own frustration. She looked down at the gouge. It wasn't just turf. It was her peace, her control. And in that moment, staring at the raw earth, a seed of something cold and hard took root in Margot Barclay's chest. Not anger anymore. Something sharper, more calculated, sweet revenge. Margot tried the reasonable route. Again, armed with photos of the gouge and a mental catalogue of past offences, the flattened hydrangea, the cracked garden gnome, a gift from her late husband Walter, she marched next door after Ted came home. Susan Henderson answered, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder, stirring something vaguely orange in a pot. "Margot? Hi. Can it wait? Conference call with Singapore." Her voice trailed off as she gestured helplessly with the wooden spoon. "Susan, the children dug a significant trench in my front lawn this morning," Margot stated, holding up her phone displaying the evidence. Susan squinted at the screen, her brow furrowed. "Oh, dear, looks messy." "Braden, Haley," she yelled over her shoulder, barely pausing her stirring. Did you dig in, Mrs.? Barclay's lawn? A distant, muffled denial floated back. Susan shrugged, offering Margot an apologetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. They swear it wasn't them. Must have been. Raccoons. They get awfully destructive this time of year. She turned back to her pot. Ted, honey, did you hear about the raccoons? Ted Henderson materialized in the hallway, wiping grease from his hands onto already stained jeans. Raccoons? Yeah, nasty buggers. Tore up my trash last week. Need a trap, Margot? I got an extra. He grinned, oblivious. Margot felt her carefully constructed composure cracking. It wasn't raccoons, Ted. It was Braden and Haley. I saw them. With a shovel. Ted waved a dismissive hand. Kids play. Grass grows back. Don't sweat the small stuff, Margot. Life's too short. He clapped Ted-like on her shoulder, a gesture that felt more like an invasion than comfort. We'll get Braden to fill it in this weekend. Maybe. He disappeared back into the garage depths. See? Susan said brightly, as if everything was settled. All good. Sorry about the... whatever it was. Gotta run. Singapore awaits. The door closed gently but firmly in Margot's face. She stood on their porch, humiliation warring with white-hot rage. Don't sweat the small stuff. Her lawn, her sanctuary, her last tangible connection to order and beauty. Small stuff? The seed of revenge sprouted thorns. Next came the physical barrier. She researched relentlessly, settling on a tasteful 3-foot-high black aluminum fence. It wasn't fortress-like, but it clearly delineated boundaries. The installation was swift. Margot watched, a flicker of hope in her chest as the last post was set. The hope lasted less than 24 hours. Returning from the grocery store, she found Haley perched precariously on top of the fence, shrieking with laughter as Braden tried to vault over it from the other side, his foot catching and bending one of the delicate pickets. They scattered like startled crows when her car pulled in, leaving the bent metal gleaming accusingly in the sun. Margot surveyed the damage, the bent picket a symbol of her futile efforts. Legal action? Over a lawn? The Hendersons would paint her as the crazy, vindictive neighbor. The HOA would likely side with the active family. Calling the police? For trespassing children? She'd be a laughingstock. She felt trapped, outmaneuvered by preteens and negligent parents. The rage simmered, threatening to boil over into something she might regret. She needed a different strategy. Not louder, not angrier. Smarter. The idea didn't strike like lightning. It seeped in, insidious and perfect, while Margot was deadheading her roses, the scent heavy in the late afternoon air. She watched Braden and Haley emerge from their house, heading not for her lawn, but for the corner store down the street. They returned minutes later, laughing, clutching oversized bags of candy, the cheap, neon-bright, teeth-rotting kind. Sour Patch Kids, warheads, gummy worms longer than their hands. They sprawled on their own patchy grass, tearing into the bags with the single-minded intensity of sharks in a feeding frenzy. Sugar, their kryptonite, their obsession. Margot remembered the discarded wrappers she constantly fished out of her flower beds, the sticky residue sometimes left on her porch railing. An idea, darkly delicious, began to form. What if? What if she weaponized their sweet tooth? Not poison, never that. But association, aversion. The concept was Pavlovian, but reversed. Instead of conditioning them to want something linked to her lawn, she would condition them to feel profoundly unwell when they even thought about setting foot on it. A psychological barrier far stronger than bent aluminum. She needed something potent, something intensely sweet, cloying, that would overwhelm their senses and, crucially, link directly to her property. It couldn't be overt. It couldn't be traceable. It had to seem natural, like the environment itself was rejecting them. The answer came from her gardening shelf, concentrated liquid fertilizer, specifically a high-phosphorus bloom booster. It had an incredibly strong, sickly sweet smell, almost like overripe fruit mixed with chemicals. Harmless to touch or even ingest in tiny accidental amounts, but utterly revolting in its intensity. Perfect. A plan, intricate and beautiful in its cruelty, blossomed in Margot's mind. She wouldn't yell. She wouldn't fence. She wouldn't complain. She would create a candy garden. Margot became a woman possessed. Her initial research deepened. She needed the timing to be impeccable, the execution flawless. She waited for a stretch of dry, warm weather, forecasted for the weekend, optimal conditions for scent dispersal and kid activity. She bought supplies discreetly, several large bottles of the concentrated bloom booster, a new high-quality garden sprayer, one that produced a fine mist, surgical gloves to avoid any scent transferred to herself, and a plain, unmarked storage bin to keep everything hidden in her garden shed. She studied their patterns. Braden and Haley were creatures of habit. Post-soccer practice chaos around 4:30 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Saturday mornings dedicated to cartoons, followed by explosive outdoor energy around 10 a.m. Sunday afternoons often involved loud games in their backyard, but occasionally spilled over the invisible line. Her plan centered on the Saturday morning ritual. They'd emerge, hyped on sugary cereal and screen time, vibrating with restless energy. That's when the candy garden would bloom. The night before Operation Sweet Aversion, Margot felt a thrilling mix of nerves and icy determination. She laid out her gear: gloves, sprayer, fertilizer, concentrate. She mixed the solution in the shed, a stronger dilution than any plant would ever need, creating a syrup-thick liquid that smelled like a candy factory exploded in a chemical plant. The scent was overpowering, even to her. Perfect. She filled the sprayer, sealed the bin, and went to bed, but not to sleep. She mentally rehearsed, visualizing the scene. Saturday dawned bright and clear. Margot was up with the birds, not to garden peacefully, but to set the stage. She watered her lawn deeply just after sunrise. Damp grass would hold the scent better. She trimmed a few bushes near the property line, appearing utterly normal. She watched, heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs, as the Henderson household stirred. The blare of cartoons filtered through their open windows. Right on schedule, around 9:55 a.m., the screen door banged open. Braden and Haley tumbled out, a whirlwind of energy. Braden kicked a soccer ball aimlessly. Haley started doing cartwheels on their lawn, each one bringing her perilously close to Margot's pristine border. Margot, kneeling by her rose bed, pretended intense focus on a stubborn aphid. She waited. Let them get comfortable. Let them feel the pull of the forbidden green expanse next door. Braden took a few practice kicks. The ball sailed and landed squarely in the middle of Margot's lawn. Margot didn't flinch. She didn't look up. "Braden, get it!" Haley yelled. Braden hesitated, glancing towards Margot's house. Seeing her apparently absorbed, he took a tentative step onto the green. Then another. He jogged towards the ball. Now. Margot moved with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned operative. Gloves snapped on. She grabbed the prepositioned sprayer from behind the rose bush. In one fluid motion, she stood and began spraying a wide, gentle arc in front of her, walking parallel to the property line, away from Braden, but ensuring the fine mist drifted directly into the path between him and his house, and crucially, across the area he stood on. The sprayer hissed softly, almost inaudible over the distant traffic. The scent hit the warm, damp air like a physical blow. That intense, cloying, artificial sweetness, magnified tenfold by the concentration and the humidity, bloomed instantly. It was the smell of cheap candy left in a hot car, mixed with the tang of chemicals. It was overpowering. Braden, bending to pick up the soccer ball, froze. He wrinkled his nose. He sniffed the air, a look of confusion, then profound disgust spreading across his face. He gagged audibly. "Ugh, what is that?" he yelled, straightening up, dropping the ball. He covered his nose and mouth with his hand, his eyes watering. "It smells like puked-up Skittles." Haley, drawn by his distress, took a step towards the property line. The wall of scent hit her too. She recoiled as if physically pushed. "Gross! Oh my God, it's awful! Did something die over here?" She pinched her nose shut, her face contorted in revulsion. Margot continued her slow walk, spraying methodically, appearing for all the world like she was simply tending to her lawn, perhaps applying a particularly pungent organic feed. She hummed softly, a picture of benign gardening. She made sure to give the area around Braden a wide berth, focusing on saturating the air and the grass along the border. "Get off there, Braden. It stinks," Haley yelled, backing away rapidly towards their own porch. "It's making me feel sick." Braden needed no further urging. He stumbled back off Margot's lawn, coughing dramatically. "It's on my shoes. Ugh!" He frantically wiped his sneakers on their own patchy grass. "What is she putting on her lawn? It smells like poison." Margot finally stopped spraying, capped the sprayer, and turned towards them, pulling off her gloves with a serene smile. "Oh, hello. Just giving the grass a little boost. High phosphorus bloom booster. Wonderful for deep greening. Does have a bit of a kick, doesn't it?" She gestured vaguely towards her roses. "Works wonders for the blooms, too." "It smells like bath candy," Haley declared, still pinching her nose. "Strong, isn't it?" Margot agreed pleasantly. "Perfectly safe, though. Just potent. Well, have a lovely day." She turned and walked calmly back towards her shed, leaving the siblings gagging and complaining on their porch, casting horrified glances at her suddenly toxic-seeming lawn. Inside her shed, Margot leaned against the door, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. Phase 1. Complete. Margot didn't rest. Consistency was key. She became a phantom gardener. Whenever Braden or Haley were outside, particularly if they looked restless or glanced towards her turf, Margot would appear, gloves on, sprayer in hand. Sometimes she'd spray lightly along the border. Sometimes she'd just walk near it, the faint residual scent clinging to her shoes or clothes enough to trigger a reaction. She made sure they saw the sprayer, saw the bottles, carefully relabeled with just Bloom Boost Concentrate in her neat handwriting. The effect was immediate and profound. The kids developed a Pavlovian aversion. The mere sight of Margot near her lawn border, especially with the sprayer, would send them scrambling back to their own property, making exaggerated, retching sounds. The once tempting expanse of green became the stink zone, the barf lawn, candy puke land. They warned their friends away with dramatic descriptions. "Don't go over there. Mrs. Barkley sprays poison candy smell. It'll make you puke." Margot cultivated the mystique. She started referring to her fertilizer in their earshot. "Time for the candy garden's special treat," she'd murmured to herself while weeding near the line. Or, to a confused delivery person, "Oh, just feeding the candy garden. Keeps it sweet." She saw the kids exchange wide-eyed, horrified glances. The psychological barrier became absolute. A stray ball landing on her lawn became a crisis. They'd stand at the very edge, debating with theatrical dread, often resorting to long sticks or begging a bewildered parent to retrieve it. Susan Henderson, retrieving a frisbee one day, wrinkled her nose. "It does smell rather strong over here lately, Margot. Is that new fertilizer?" "Oh, yes," Margot smiled sweetly. "Very effective. Keeps everything looking vibrant and keeps the pests away." She didn't specify which pests. Susan just nodded vaguely and hurried back, rubbing her nose. Ted, retrieving a basketball, took a deep, experimental sniff. "Kinda sweet, like cheap wine or something." He shrugged. "Whatever works, I guess. Kids sure hate it." He chuckled, oblivious to the masterful manipulation. The lawn flourished, greener and thicker than ever, a lush, beautiful minefield. Margot's sanctuary was restored, protected by an invisible olfactory moat. She gardened in peace, the sounds of the Henderson children now blessedly distant, confined to their own territory. The sweet scent of victory, mingling faintly with the chemical sweetness in the air, was intoxicating. Chapter 7. The Unintended Harvest. Margot's victory was absolute. Her lawn remained pristine, untouched by Henderson sneakers or shovels. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She could sit on her porch with her iced tea, enjoying the dappled sunlight and the chorus of birds, without the jarring interruption of shrieks or the sickening crunch of plants underfoot. The candy garden defense was a resounding success. But revenge, even the sweet, non-confrontational kind, can have unexpected ripples. Margot began to notice a change not just in the kids' avoidance, but in their behavior towards sweets. The constant stream of candy bags from the corner store slowed. She saw them choose apples sometimes, or packs of crackers. Once, she overheard Haley refuse a gummy worm offered by a friend. "No way. It smells like Barkley's lawn. I can't even look at sour candy anymore without feeling queasy." Margot felt a flicker of something unexpected. Not guilt, precisely, but a twinge of consequence. She hadn't intended to ruin candy for them, just her lawn. It was an unforeseen side effect of her psychological warfare. Then came the neighborhood barbecue. The Hendersons hosted a chaotic affair with overflowing coolers and a smoky grill. Margot attended, feeling magnanimous in her victory. She brought her famous potato salad. As dusk settled and the fire pit glowed, someone brought out bags of marshmallows, chocolate bars, and graham crackers for s'mores. The kids gathered excitedly. Haley was handed a perfectly toasted, gooey marshmallow sandwiched between chocolate and graham cracker. She brought it to her mouth, then hesitated. She sniffed it. Her face paled slightly. She took a tiny bite, chewed slowly. Then her expression crumpled. "Ugh," she muttered, dropping the s'more onto her plate. "It tastes weird, like that smell." She pushed the plate away. "I don't want it." Braden, mid-bite into his own s'more, paused. He looked at Haley, then down at his treat. He sniffed cautiously. A shadow crossed his face. He didn't gag, but his enthusiasm visibly drained. He finished the bite, but slowly, without relish, and didn't reach for another. Margot watched this small drama unfold from her lawn chair. Susan noticed too. "Haley, not hungry for s'mores? That's a first." Haley just shook her head, looking genuinely distressed. "They taste like Mrs. Barkley's lawn smells. It's gross." Susan laughed, a little uncomfortably. "Oh, honey, don't be silly. It's just a marshmallow." But Margot saw the genuine aversion in Haley's eyes, the way Braden eyed the remaining s'mores supplies, with suspicion rather than greed. Her sweet revenge had inadvertently soured something fundamental for them. It was a victory, yes, but it left a faintly bitter aftertaste she hadn't anticipated. She hadn't broken them, but she'd altered a simple childhood pleasure. It was a power she hadn't fully considered. The aversion seemed to solidify. Braden and Haley actively avoided candy aisles. Birthday party goodie bags filled with sweets were met with lukewarm enthusiasm, often discarded or traded for non-food items. Their dentist might have been pleased, but Margot sensed a loss of innocence, a wariness implanted by her olfactory warfare. They didn't whine or complain much about it. It was just a fact. Candy Barclay's lawn smell disgust. Their energy, however, didn't diminish. It just found new outlets. They became obsessed with skateboarding, practicing ollies and kickflips on the relatively smooth pavement of their own driveway, the rhythmic scrape and thud of far more tolerable background noise than their previous shrieking. They built elaborate, wobbly bike ramps out of scrap wood. They started a very noisy neighborhood car wash fundraiser, enthusiastically soaking each other and any passing dog more than the actual cars. The chaotic energy was still there, but it was focused, contained mostly to their own property. Margot noticed Susan Henderson watching them more, not just glancing but actually observing. She saw the frustration when a skateboard rattled the porch steps, the resigned sigh when the hose fight migrated onto her freshly washed minivan. Ted seemed slightly more engaged, occasionally offering pointers on a skateboard trick, his phone temporarily forgotten. One Saturday morning, Margot was enjoying her coffee when she heard a different kind of shout from next door. Not play fighting, but genuine distress. She looked over to see Haley sitting on the driveway, clutching her knee, tears streaming down her face. Braden hovered anxiously. Susan rushed out, dropping to her knees beside her daughter. Margot watched, a detached observer, as Susan carefully examined the scraped knee, her expression a mixture of concern and exhaustion. She spoke softly to Haley, brushing hair from her forehead, a gesture of tenderness Margot hadn't witnessed before. Ted emerged, not with his usual bluster, but with the first aid kit. He knelt beside them, his movements awkward but earnest. Margot saw it then. The constant low-grade chaos she'd resented had masked something else. The genuine struggle of parents overwhelmed by their children's boundless energy. Susan wasn't maliciously neglectful. She was drowning. Ted wasn't deliberately absent. He was checked out, perhaps equally overwhelmed. Her perfect lawn had been a symbol of her control, but their chaotic life was a symptom of their lack of it. The thorns on her revenge felt a little sharper. A few weeks later, a miracle occurred. A stray baseball, hit with surprising force from a game down the street, sailed over the Hendersons' fence and landed with a soft thud right in the center of Margot's flawless lawn. Braden and Haley appeared at their property line, stricken. They looked at the ball, then at each other, then at Margot's house. The familiar dread washed over their faces. Retrieving it meant entering the sting zone. Margot watched from her living room window. She saw the silent debate, the visible shudder as Braden took a half step forward before recoiling. Haley shook her head violently. They stood paralyzed, staring at the lost ball like it was radioactive. An unfamiliar impulse stirred in Margot. Not pity, exactly. More like a cessation of hostilities. The lawn was safe. The war was won. Did she need to keep enforcing the embargo so absolutely? The sight of them, genuinely distressed, powerless against their own conditioned aversion, softened something hard within her. The bitter aftertaste of the s'mores incident lingered. She walked out onto her porch. Braden and Haley froze, eyes wide like cornered rabbits. Margot didn't reach for the sprayer. She walked calmly down her steps and across her lawn. The scent, while still faintly present to her trained nose, was negligible after weeks without reinforcement. She bent down, picked up the baseball, and walked towards the property line. Braden and Haley took an involuntary step back. Margot stopped a few feet short. She held the ball out. "It landed over here," she said, her voice neutral. "Must have been quite a hit." They stared, uncomprehending for a moment. Braden was the first to unfreeze. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, stretching his arm out to its limit, snatching the ball from her hand as if it might burn him, then scrambling back to safety. "Thanks, Mrs. Barclay," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Haley just nodded mutely, her gaze fixed on Margot's hands, perhaps checking for the dreaded sprayer. Margot simply nodded. "You're welcome." She turned and walked back to her porch. She didn't look back, but she felt their stunned silence behind her. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't even warmth. But it was a truce. A small return of the ball, a small lifting of the siege, on her terms. Summer bled into fall. Maple Creek Estates settled into a new rhythm. Margot's lawn remained an immaculate, fragrantly defended jewel. The candy garden smell had faded significantly, becoming just a faint, slightly sweet note on the breeze near the border, noticeable only if you were really looking for it. To Braden and Haley, however, the association remained potent. They gave her property a wide berth, but without the previous theatrical gagging. It was a simple, ingrained avoidance. Their energy found its channel. Skateboards were upgraded, the driveway ramp became legendary and slightly terrifying, and Ted even helped them build a treehouse, which leaned alarmingly. The noise was still there, the occasional crash or yell, but it was contained, purposeful. Margot found she could tune it out, the way one tunes out the sound of a distant highway. She saw Susan outside more, sometimes actually gardening in a haphazard way, sometimes just sitting on the steps with a coffee, watching the kids. Ted still tinkered, but he also tossed a football with Braden sometimes. They weren't perfect, but they seemed less adrift. One crisp October afternoon, Margot was planting tulip bulbs along her border, enjoying the cool earth and the promise of spring. Haley was practicing skateboard tricks on their driveway. She fell, not hard, but enough to make her sit down abruptly with a frustrated, "Ah!" Margot paused, trowel in hand. An impulse, faint but persistent. She stood up, walked to her garden shed, and emerged not with the sprayer, but with a small unopened bag of expensive dark chocolate-covered almonds she'd bought on a whim. She walked to the property line. Haley looked up, wary. Margot held out the bag. "Fall planting fuel," she said, her voice carefully casual. "Dark chocolate? No. Lawn smell." She placed the bag carefully on the very edge of her property, on their side of the invisible line. "Share them with your brother, or don't." She turned and walked back to her tulip bulbs without waiting for a response. She didn't look back, but she heard the tentative rustle of the bag, then Haley's voice, softer than usual. "Hey, Braden, Mrs. Barclay gave us chocolate, the dark kind." Margot knelt back down, pressing a bulb into the cool soil. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. Not the fierce, triumphant smile of victory, but something quieter, softer, the satisfaction of equilibrium. Her sanctuary was secure, defended not by fences or fury, but by a carefully cultivated aversion. The Henderson children were contained, their chaotic energy redirected, and maybe, just maybe, the bitter aftertaste of her sweet revenge was finally fading, replaced by something resembling peace. She hadn't gotten an apology. She hadn't gotten perfect neighbors. But she'd gotten her lawn back, her peace back, and a quiet, enduring victory on her own terms. The candy garden had served its purpose. Now it was just a lawn again. Her sanctuary, her control, and that was enough. The end.